Okay, so today we're going to cover, thank you for joining me. I should probably have said that. My name's Alex O'Neill. I'm Code's Professional Services Manager. I manage our consultancy team and I do the development on iComply, helping to make it better, more efficient, more in line with what you're looking for and getting your responses as well and trying to improve it based on what you think of it. And today I'm going to talk to you and I'd like to explore and talk about the effective key line of inquiry, I can't speak today. Key line of inquiry, I'll say KLOE. So we're going to talk about the effective KLOE. So it's obviously one of the 5 KLOEs that came in April this year, 2015. And it is a medium-sized KLOE, I would say. It's not as big as SAFE. SAFE is huge. Well, it's probably about the same size as well-led. And obviously we covered caring last time, and it's a lot bigger than caring. Caring is very, very small. Most practices that have been inspected under the new key lines of inquiry have been told that they're meeting the effective KLOE. So in most practices, it's not actually an issue. But it is an issue in some practices. Some practices have had trouble with it, but no one has actually failed their new style inspection, as far as I can see, on the effective KLOE alone. It's usually in tandem with something else. So what is it about? What is being effective about in a nutshell? So in a nutshell, being effective is about having proof that you assess people's needs, give clinical advice and deliver treatment in line with legislation, standards and evidence-based guidance. It's about you recording all of this information accurately, contemporaneously, in detail in clinical records, as you're required to do by the different guidelines. It's about your team being up to date with their CPD requirements and you supporting them to be so. It's about inducting your team, training your team so that they are competent to deliver the services that you provide to patients, which we'll have a look at. It's about holding appraisals, identifying skill gaps, and it's about your team knowing how to deal with, say, mental capacity. Mental capacity is mentioned a lot under effective, how they can deal with certain mental capacity scenarios. So inspectors will put mental capacity scenarios to different team members to see if they understand how to spot problems and how to deal with them. So in line with the GDC, we need to have aims, objectives and learning outcomes. So the aim is to increase understanding of the new inspection regime and help practices prepare for inspection. This is what these webinars are all about. These are to help you. The objectives are to examine the inspection prompts for effective in the Provider Handbook. We're going to explore the CQC's examples of evidence for effective in the Provider Handbook. So not only the prompts, but what the CQC say they're going to be looking at. And then what's probably even more valuable with this is to look at how practices are being judged regarding effective in recently published inspection reports. So I brought the research that we were talking about in the last webinar. That's all been brought up to date. We're going to explain how to implement the new clinical records audit in iComply. We're going to talk about that and why that's really, really important under the new key lines of inquiry and the fundamental standards. Okay, so the learning outcomes at the moment, to explain what the CQC means by effective. So we should have an understanding. By the end of this, you should be able to tell your team members, and hopefully you'll have a good understanding of what the CQC means by effective. To describe the effective inspection prompts and explain what the CQC are looking for to your team members. To be able to implement the new clinical records audit, and to be able to demonstrate to an inspector how your practice is effective using the key line of inquiry report in iComply. So what's going on with the CQC and the inspection regime? I've updated my research. I have looked through 179 new inspection reports that have been published since the 1st of April this year and before the 23rd of the 9th, 15. So with those new style inspection reports, I think I've covered every inspection report that's been published. I may have missed one or two here or there, but 19% of practices being inspected are in breach of at least one regulation and are failing their inspections. This is a big thing, we think, compared with the old inspection regimes, where obviously they weren't looking at quality assurance, they weren't looking for continuous improvement, and 1 in 5 practices are basically being told they must make improvements, which to me is a big, big change. 58% of practices are being told that they could and should make improvements. So almost 60% of practices are being told that there are certain ways they should improve. And actually, when you look at those inspection reports, some of those practices that are being told that they could or should improve are being told the same things that the ones who are told they were in breach of standards. So I think that's down to how the practice, what confidence the practice gives the inspection about the inspector about their approach to compliance when they come into practice on the day. That's obviously just my interpretation. And most practices that are in breach are failing on the well-led KLOE. They're not satisfying inspectors that they are using quality assurance to drive continuous improvement. They're not doing their risk assessments or audits. They're not doing them accurately. This was an interesting one. I don't think this is standard for inspections, but this last point, the inspection took place over a day and was carried out by a CQC inspector, a dental specialist advisor, and a practice management specialist advisor. So this poor practice had three people looking at them. So they didn't seem to have any issues in the practice before. I don't know if this is a new way that they're doing inspections. I doubt it, but I'll let you know in the next webinar if that's something that seems to be coming standard, but I doubt it will be. Okay, so the Provider Handbook. I always mention this in every single webinar. Please go and download this from the CQC website. But it is your guide to how they're going to inspect you, and it's got the inspection prompts in, so you really should have a look at it if you haven't by now. It's just that point. So the key lines of inquiry, the KLOEs. So today, I won't go through all of them, but today we're looking at effective. So by effective, the CQC mean that people's care, treatment and support achieves good outcomes, promotes a good quality of life, and is based on the best available evidence. The effective KLOE is related to fundamental standards. Well, I always say this, if you don't have iComply, you could always go and try and map these and have a look at the regulations, the fundamental standards document, which I think they've cut down the latest version to about 105 pages. It's still quite long, but if you don't have iComply, you could go and do that and try and figure out how to create a filing system to match up with what they're looking at in your practice. To be honest, if you do have iComply, then obviously you've got the KLOE reports, so it's a lot easier for you to see that. But you can do that, and you could look in the handbook to help you prepare your filing system. So, what is an effective practice? So, according to the CQC, this was an effective practice. So, if we have a look at this together, and we can just pick certain things out. So, with the CQC, with this practice, they found that the practice was providing effective care in accordance with the relevant regulations. Patients' dental care records provided information about their current dental needs and past treatment. Now, this practice didn't fail their inspection, but they did point out that some clinical records were brief and missing updated medical histories and BPE charting. It wasn't so bad for them to be in breach on effective, but the practices that have been in breach over effective, this is one of the major points that they are falling down on is clinical records. The practice monitored any changes in the patient's oral health, made referrals to specialist services. So referrals is covered, but to be honest, nobody's having any problems with their referrals, with how they do referrals and their referral process. The practice followed guidance issued by the Faculty of General Dental Practice, the FGDP, for example, regarding taking x-rays, appropriate intervals. They haven't said about NICE guidelines there, but they do look at that. In the actual handbook, there is the list of the guidance they expect you to be aware of in the practice. So you can go to the handbook and look at that list. Obviously in iComply we have the evidence-based dentistry step, which reminds you to go and review that. And I will be updating that to mention the list in the Provider Handbook as well. So this practice had a strong focus on preventative care and supporting patients to achieve better oral health. So the Delivering Better Oral Health Toolkit. Patients were given advice regarding maintaining good oral health, and if appropriate were referred to the dental hygienist. Did I already say that? But the point there obviously is it was clear. They could see it. It was in the notes. It had been recorded, and the practices that didn't record it are running into issues on this. Staff are supported. As I said, it's really important that you're seen as being a supportive practice. Regarding general dental, were supported by the practice regarding their continuing their CPD, and they were meeting the requirements of their professional registration. Staff were knowledgeable about how to ensure patients had sufficient information on mental capacity and had sufficient information and the mental capacity to give informed consent. Sorry, it's a bit of a big one there to read. So you can see that's what a successful practice, an effective practice is. So a less effective practice, in contrast to that, we found that this practice was not providing effective care in accordance with the relevant regulations. We've told the provider to take action, so you can see that in the report what that action is. The dental care provided was evidence-based and focused on the needs of the patient. Staff were registered and had CPD and they were meeting the requirements. However, staff were not up to date with the current guidance. So they've looked at that list, they've probably spoken to the staff, to this team, and seen what they were aware of, what they're not aware of. For example, the sedation guidelines were updated in April 2015 this year. The trainee dental nurses did not always receive training appropriate to their role and learning needs. We'll see that again in a minute. Patients' clinical records we reviewed did not always provide a full and accurate account of the care and treatment they had received. And we're going to discuss this later and look at iComply, but we've introduced the clinical records audit to meet this need. So, the effective prompts and examples of evidence. I won't go into all the examples of evidence, but you can have a look at this whilst they're on the screen, because I think it's more important to see what they're looking at in the reports than what they've written on the actual handbook itself. But this is very good for you. If you get the handbook, this is taken and copied and pasted exactly from the handbook. But are people's needs assessed and care treatment delivered in line with current legislation standards and evidence-based guidance? Do staff have the skills, knowledge and experience to deliver effective care and treatment? Are there effective arrangements in place for working with other health professionals to ensure quality care for the patient? That's to do with referrals, and as I said, no one's really having a problem with that. But you can see on E2, on do the staff have the skills and the knowledge, it's to do with, say, are learning needs identified, so appraisals as well. So if practices aren't doing appraisals and aren't identifying skill gaps, then that's going to be a problem. Members of the dental team are up to date with their CPD and being supported. I did read about two therapists, I believe, who were taken off the GDC register because they were both of them were 1 hour short on their cycle, and the GDC's position on this was, well, you've had 5 years, there's no good reason that you haven't completed all the required hours for your verifiable CPD, and they were taken off the register. So obviously, if you do keep those CPD records, I doubt the CQC inspector is going to look at it and then say anything to the GDC, but it is something that's being taken more seriously, your CPD cycle. And then on the end there, is people's consent to care and treatment always sought in line with legislation and guidance? So consent, valid consent, and the proof of that is in your records. Obviously they'll talk to your patients and ask about consent, they'll ask your team, they'll put mental capacity situations, scenarios to your team and see if they know and they've had adequate training. And they will also look, the options, risks and benefits are clearly in the notes and the patient made an informed choice. Anyone who's watched all of the webinars will know that I probably mention that on every webinar, but it's really that important. So the effective report section, in the report that they published, the CQC inspection reports that have been published, it's broken down into 5 sections: monitoring and improving outcomes for patients, health promotion and prevention, staffing, working with other services, and consent for care and treatment. So monitoring and improving outcomes for patient is to do with, are you doing record card auditing in the practice? Are you recording all the things you need to be recording in line with all the guidance? Just a handful of examples would be BPE, soft tissues, intraoral, extraoral, oral cancer. Not only that, but the advice you give. So also if a patient tells you they smoke and they're a heavy smoker, what advice did you give them and did you record that in the notes? So that also comes under the health promotion and prevention, so smoking advice, advice to do with alcohol consumption, basically in line with the Delivering Better Oral Health Toolkit. In staffing, staffing is to do with induction and appraisals, up-to-date GDC registration and indemnity, CPR training, that they are trained to deal with medical emergencies, infection control training, safeguarding training. They're talking about all of these things in the reports. Do team members feel supported? And quite interestingly, in a few reports, they talked about whether management had adequate time to do management. So they were actually pulling up some practices where the manager was a nurse who was also desk-based, and they said that the manager had admin time but had no dedicated management time to manage compliance, which I thought was quite interesting. Working with other services is to do with referral processes, and no one's had any problems with this. Every practice of the 172 were absolutely fine. Consent to care and treatment is, do patients have sufficient information? So information leaflets in your waiting room are a must, I would say, for basic treatments. Are the discussions recorded? Are they being given treatment plans? Is there adequate training for mental capacity, and do your team understand it? And are patients given time to make informed choices? And I think we spoke about this in another webinar, but I have heard or read that they have looked at appointment books to make sure that you're not routinely doing treatment straight after examinations. Okay, so moving on. Okay, so clinical records. Just to talk about this because it's so important with what they're looking at. These quotes are all taken from different reports. Well, maybe two are from the same, but I think they're all from different reports. But the clinical records, practice audits of clinical records showed dentists did not always document advice given to patients appropriate to their individual needs, such as smoking cessation or diet advice. So this is the conversation. Obviously, you should be noting down their alcohol and their smoke and how many cigarettes they smoke, and then you should be giving advice in line with the Delivering Better Oral Health Toolkit if you're a dentist or a hygienist as a clinician. And the audits that they had demonstrated that the dentist didn't actually always record. So the first one is about advice. The second point here is about recording their use of alcohol or tobacco and the examinations of soft tissues. So going to the third point, that's about BPE scores. We checked a sample of dental records and found that the BPE scores were not recorded for all of these patients. So they're not recording the BPE scores, which obviously they should be doing. Comments cards confirm that treatment options, risks and benefits were discussed. However, our review of records found that these discussions were not consistently recorded in line with GDC standards. So that could be what could be termed as a fitness to practice issue. So if someone was doing that habitually, you really wouldn't want, obviously the CQC, the NHS and the GDC are working in this triumvirate now, and they have this horizontal line of communication if they come across serious concerns. So they could, if that was something they saw that was happening a lot, they could pass that on. So obviously you want to avoid that. And the last one there, we found that justifications, findings and quality assurance of X-ray images was taken, and X-ray images taken was not always recorded. So they're really looking at your clinical records, and we've introduced for you into iComply a really good clinical records audit, which we're going to talk about later. So other points for people not being effective. The practice didn't keep up to date with current guidelines and research. So obviously in iComply you have the evidence-based dentistry step in order to help you meet that. There's no induction program for staff to follow, so they weren't inducting their staff, and that is actually a prescriptive term in the fundamental standard. You must induct your staff, and that induction must include cross-infection control. I think there's some other points there as well. This was an interesting one. This is a practice that had 5 trainee dental nurses and no qualified dental nurses in the practice. So obviously they had concerns here. They said that the trainee dental nurses that they spoke with expressed concerns that they'd not been given adequate practical training or support to do their role, and the 5 dentists they spoke to confirmed it. So said the exact same thing. So in this practice, the nurses hadn't properly been inducted, the dentists supported that, and the CQC got that information from both people. So that's just showing you again that when they go around your practice, they're going to talk to your nurses, they're going to talk to your dentists separately, they'll ask them the same sorts of questions, see whether or not everyone's saying the same thing. And obviously for this practice that was a serious issue. So staff had not had formal training in mental capacity. They were clear about how they would deal with the situation, but they weren't sure of their requirements under the Act. So obviously in iComply you've got the mental capacity step, you've got the documents. If you want further training on that, I think it's probably really good to get CPD in it, and we do have a DVD on that if you'd like to see that, and you can get that off the Code website for the DVD. We found the provider had not ensured staff were fully trained to enable them to fully support patients effectively. So basically, the staff had not been trained in medical emergencies, risk management processes. So maybe the manager didn't know how to do risk assessments, and they hadn't had training in consent. So obviously that's a big deal for a practice, that consent and medical emergencies are quite essential. So obviously in iComply we have the medical emergency step to remind you to have the right equipment. We have the CPR reminder to remind you to book your CPR training. We have the risk assessments and audits, and you have the phone support from the office that you're paying for with your subscription in order to help you deal with that. If you get stuck on how to use one of our documents, please call us and we'll give the support. I'm sure everybody in this room has called the office at some point and had really good support from the girls in the office. There was no evidence within any of the staff files that staff had been engaged in an appraisal process. There were no formal meetings held which would identify staff training needs. So that's to do with appraisals, personal development plans, making sure you've got those in place, and obviously we have all the appraisal documents in iComply for you. So you can see that, fortunately for you who are subscribed to iComply, these points that the practices are falling down upon. And what I did is I actually went through all of those reports and I took out where the practices were failing, and I gave a quote for each major area. And luckily enough for everybody, or not luckily, obviously by design, we've got those areas all covered for you. Okay, so effective surface signs is a little bit more difficult than, say, safety surface signs or the other surface signs we've looked at in previous webinars. But if you've got good meeting minutes, that's a very good sign that you're being effective. And good appraisal notes. I probably should have said appraisal notes. If you've got information leaflets in the practice, in the waiting room, if I walk into a practice or one of my team walks into a practice to do a health check, to do an audit, a full compliance check, then if you see information leaflets there, along with obviously a complaints procedure on the wall, a price list there, then your initial confidence is high about how that day is going to go. Training and CPD records, if you've got good training and CPD records and induction records as well in the practice, that's going to help show that you are effective. Quality of clinical records, obviously exceptionally important. It's to make sure that the clinical records are good. And confidence in answering mental capacity scenarios, I should have said rather than questions there. So how iComply helps you to be effective? Well, we've covered most of this whilst I've been talking about the points, but the new clinical records audit, appraisals, inductions, personal development plans, all the steps, reviews regarding those, the training and the CPD log sheets that you've got, if you have those in the staff and personnel files, and whenever you do meetings or anything internal in the practice, or if they bring you their CPD certificates, if you fill out just a basic log sheet to show all the bases are being checked, then that's going to go some way to help demonstrate that you're effective. We give you guidance based on actual inspections. Obviously, that goes into our modules, into our documents, and that's what I'm doing right now. I'm giving you the feedback from inspections, from talking to people who've been inspected, and from all of those reports that we've been looking at. The KLOE report effective prompts. So what we've done is in iComply, we match up all the things that you do that would be covered by those effective prompts, and when you sign those off, it's going to date stamp it with your notes and with the date, and it's going to say what folder it's in, and that it matches those particular effective prompts for you to show an inspector when they come in. Free webinars is what you're getting right now. As an iComply member, you do get these free webinars, which are done usually every month. We've just had a break. I think we might have a break in December, I'm not sure, as well for Christmas, because everyone's going to be pretty busy, but we'll see. With the guidance based on the inspection reports, which is there as well. And the full compliance health checks. I think quite a few people who are in the room today have had myself or one of my team in doing a full compliance check, and they'll get that action list that's going to tell them how they can actually comply. Okay, so if we just have a quick look, and we're going to talk about the, I didn't realise I'd been talking so long there. So we're going to have a look at the, into iComply, and we're going to have a look at the new clinical records audit and how that would work in your practice. So in iComply, one of the things that people tell us really concerns them with compliance is how do they stay up to date. Obviously, compliance is moving faster and faster all of the time. So compliance is moving faster and faster all the time, and that is what you pay for with your iComply subscription. Part of what you pay for is for us to be plugged into many, many update services, email update services, to go through those and to see, we have a team of about 4 or 5 people to see what needs updating, what we need to give you document-wise, and so that you don't need to worry about that. So that we do that for you, and you're not either spending your management time, or if you're a principal, paying your manager to spend time researching. So the iComply news section is really, really good for that. So what we've done, obviously, is with these inspections and with what's going on, we identified that there is a need there for a really good clinical records audit that you can show an inspector and help manage associates, if you have associates who you feel could potentially get the practice into trouble with their record keeping. So we've developed that. So when you log into iComply, every single time, what you want to do is have a look up here at the news section, which I'm just highlighting. And the news section, if I click view all, just here, you see there's lots of historic news. So the last news item on equality, dignity and human rights, we introduced that because the CQC started to talk a lot about equality, dignity and human rights, and we felt that our documents needed updating, and we've actually just released a DVD on that, a very, very good DVD done by a lady called Anne Kambata about how to do that. And if you look a little bit further down, if we scroll down here, then we've got one, say, the new CQC regulations. So this April, I'm sure everybody knows now, we got 2 brand new regulations. So we had to develop documents to help you to meet those regulations. So if you haven't done so yet, then you can come back and look in the news section to see if there's anything that you might want to put into place right now. So for the new clinical records audit, if I just go back to the dashboard, you can see on the 19th of the 8th there, in order to help meet what inspectors are looking for, we've introduced this new document, G180 CRA. So we've said if your cycle was created before the 19th of August, then you've got some steps to follow there, which I won't go through there because they're on the screen, but it tells you how to do it and how to create it to go on your compliance report. If you didn't if you started your cycle after the 19th of August, then it will be on your calendar. So if we go to it here, it's going to be it's just here in month 4. So you see annual clinical records audit here. So if I click on that, I've got instructions, which I won't go through now. But if I go down, these will tell me exactly what to do. It'll also tell me once I've finished it where I can file it, which will be in folder 10. But if I go down here into related templates, then I can download the clinical records audit from here. Now, with any what the CQC are looking for is that you're practicing, or one of the things they're looking for is that you're practicing quality assurance. Now, I don't know if you can actually see that audit, but what they're looking for is that you're practicing quality assurance. So what I'm going to suggest that people do is you need to set a standard with your team. So what's very good if you're introducing a new clinical records audit, if you have the time, is to have meetings or one-to-ones with your dentist, or a whole meeting with the dental team, or one-to-ones, and tell them that you're going to audit them on this in a few months. And give them a copy of the audit so they know what the standard is in your practice. That's a very good way to do it, rather than just spring the audit on them. So give them time to bring things up to standard if you feel like it could be an issue in your practice. Okay, so on the screen there you should see my audit. Now the audit, well, we're not going to go through that line by line, but this can show you just everything that the CQC are looking for, that dentists should be doing in their clinical records. So you probably want to give them a copy of this before you start double checking them on it. Once you've carried out the audit, what you're probably going to want to do is sign that off in iComply. So you'd go down to here and you'd say whether or not you downloaded a template, where you did, whether or not you updated, adapted or adopted one, which you would have done, and any actions arising from this audit have been completed or have been scheduled to be carried out. So we'll just say we've got the completed audit here and have scheduled actions and it's going to go in iComply folder 10. We've been told that it needs to go in iComply folder 10. And I'm going to mark that as complete. Now what I forgot to do was schedule anything using to-dos. But what I can do, which a lot of people aren't aware of, is once you've closed something in iComply, you can't edit it because you've created an audit trail. But what you may wish to do is go back and add those actions to make sure that you could show the CQC on your compliance report that you're carrying out, that you are carrying out quality assurance as a related to do. So you could come back to here and type in, decide who you want to give it to. So I'm going to give it to myself. And the title is going to be Review Records in 1 month. Because I want to double check it in a month's time as titled. Then I can actually create a to-do. Oh, activity can't start in the past, sorry. So I've now created a to-do to review the records in a month's time. And then if I go to my compliance report, it's a brand new practice, so I'll just find it down here. You can see here it's completed here that we've audited and we've scheduled actions as to do, and it's in folder 10. So that will actually show under well-led, it'll actually show under safe and under effective, because it's that clinical records are that important that they appear under all sections of the compliance report. Just a brief chat about the new clinical records audit, how you can find it on the compliance report, and how you can add related to-dos to a step once it's been closed.